Headmaster, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, Tim Harrison, for those very fine words. You remember more about my life in the 60s than I do, and that's one of the things they say about the 60s, isn't it, if you enjoyed them. If I'd known that you were going to speak so kindly of me, for the sheer pleasure of hearing what you said, I'd have retired years ago. May I begin by thanking all of you for being here today. It is absolutely splendid, I must say, to be surrounded by so many former and current colleagues and friends on this important day. I would also like to thank the head, Justin Garrick, for offering Bob and me this celebration. I have recently realised that one of the nice things about being appointed to the staff of Canberra Grammar School at the age of 28 is that no one accused me of being on the glide path to retirement. I was an unlikely appointment. When I stepped out of the taxi at the main entrance to the office, I was setting foot in a non-government school for the first time in my life. Paul McEwen undoubtedly saw me as a risky appointment, and so I was offered the position as German and French teacher for 2 years only. I managed to stay a little longer. The risk that he took was no greater than my own. I had grown up in Sydney, was just returned from 2 years overseas, the time evenly split between London and Munich. I was a big city boy, arriving for an interview in the Canberra of late December 1975. In a landslide, Malcolm Fraser had been elected Prime Minister 4 days earlier. I mentioned that only to remind myself how long ago it all was. And Canberra seemed deserted. And it was 9 months before I discovered that at least one other member of staff had voted for the man considered Grammar's greatest old boy. Returning to my previous employment with the New South Wales Department of Education was impossible. It was not employing any teachers at all. And the only other job offer was in the finance industry, which would have led my life in an entirely different direction. And I wasn't ready to accept a horizon delineated by dollar signs. In any case, I was determined to remain a German teacher. More about that later. That interview with Paul McEwen changed my life, and I'm delighted to see his wife Wilma in the audience today. Thank you for being here, Wilma. You've always been a great champion of the school. Staff induction was a brief affair. On that first day I met the second master, who informed me I had been assigned to swimming as my co-curricular activity. I also met the assistant to the headmaster, Alan Briggs, who was also head of the languages department. He said, "You've got the German ambassador's son in your Year 12 class, so your German had better be good." And thus inducted, off I went to teach my first classes. As I had explained that I was unable to swim very well, the next morning the second master informed me that I was instead the coach of the under-13C cricket team, where it didn't seem to matter that one could neither bowl nor bat. 30 years on, I was the proud recipient of the prize named in his honour, the Ian Powell Memorial Award. Thank you, Alison, for being present today. When the winter season arrived, I became the even more improbable coach of an under-13 rugby team. By Easter time, I was ready to hit the highway and get back to Sydney, where my friends wanted to know what it was like. I told them that it was what all schools should be, by which I didn't mean that all schools should be the same, but that here was a school where the parents were genuinely concerned for their son's education and had high expectations for them. Sometimes too high perhaps, but much better than having no expectations at all. The staff were hard-working and committed. Pastoral care really meant something. The facilities were first-rate, and there were lots of areas for boys to play and roam about and even have a quiet smoke. If a boy wants to have a smoke these days, he has to fill out a risk assessment check. And it's reduced the rate of smoking considerably. By the beginning of third term, it was the era of the three-term year, remember? I had started to feel like an established presence in the school until I was approached by the MIC Athletics, who scolded me because I had not yet entered my name 8 times on the Ath Standards roster, 6 afternoons and 2 Saturdays. Yes, I have, I protested. Really? Who are you? He asked. And following my grandfather's precept that I should always honour his aunts as honestly as I could, I replied, I'm Bill Maude. No, you're not, he said. It was the first and only time in my life I've been accused of not being who I am. If the staff sometimes seemed not so friendly, the boys were a different matter altogether. Knowledgeable and talented, clever, cheeky in that forgivable way that only clever boys know, I was delighted by them. I'd like to welcome 6 boys from my first Year 10 class in 1976. They took a lot of joy in singing. In 1977, as chairman of the Headmasters' Conference, Paul McEwen decided to invite a group of senior educators from the New England Association of Schools and Colleges to introduce full school appraisal into Australia. There was no better place to start than his own school. I told those same boys, now in Year 11, that the panel would come to our class. Well, sir, we'll just have to sing. And the panel that came to our class consisted of one very astute woman, and I warned her that the boys wanted simply to sing. Which they did, one German song after the other with great gusto. She was enthralled. As a boys' school, she thought we were top of the class. And surely, even today, the tradition of our house shout distinguishes us as a school in a very meaningful way. I didn't intend to stay for as long as I have. I remember deciding in the middle of 1984 that I was going to return to Sydney. But the opportunities just kept coming. Within months of making that decision, I was offered the housemastership of Sheaf. It seemed like a great opportunity, and it had become very clear to me what a great influence housemasters can have on a boy's life. From a selfish point of view, it was something interesting to put on the CV. Moreover, for a long time, I had wanted to return to Germany and live there for a while. In 1989, I got approval to go on a 1-year exchange teaching post to Hamburg in Germany, and plans for a return to Sydney were put off once again. I left Australia in September 1989. If anyone had told me that before I returned, Germany would be a reunited country, no one would have believed it, but it was true. And I was fortunate enough to live within 10 kilometres of the east-west border, so that on the 9th of November 1989, Patricia and I were able to drive to the border and watch the East Germans streaming across into the west. This event did more than signal the end of the 20th century. For me, it was a mystical reward for years of devotion to the study and teaching of German. And I came back with a Munich girl. And our two children had a Canberra Grammar education. Nothing like having one's own child and stepchild go through the school to understand really what the school is on about and how much we parents owe to it. My next opportunity was what I considered the best job in the school, Director of Studies. I enjoyed it so much I kept it up for 16 years. These were years of working with great teams of people, the school executive, the heads of departments who were the intellectual and cultural leaders of the school, and housemasters totally dedicated to the students in their care. It is difficult to thank individuals by name in a short speech like this, but I must pay tribute to two members of the support staff, Deanne Sutton and Maureen Traherne, for being such loyal and willing supporters. Canberra Grammar School has had 6 headmasters and 2 more who stood in that role at important moments in the school's history, 8 in total, a quite modest number in a time span of 85 years. I had the pleasure of working with 5 of the 8. Paul McEwen, who was the living proof of my belief that the person at the top makes all the difference in any institution. Tim Murray, the architect headmaster, bringing architectural harmony to the school and creating buildings that are symbolic of his vision for the school, and whose proud boast found suitably modest expression. This is a good school, getting better. Simon Murray, the perfect gentleman who believed the school's duty was to create the gentleman. Chris Walsh, the once were headmasters, who enjoys the challenge of reconciling that past with his present chaplaincy. And lastly, Justin Garrick, the academic, determined to make this school one of the most successful, dynamic and distinctive centres of learning in Australia. There is no reason he will not succeed with your help. Recently, I've been the Human Resources Manager. 5 years ago, some of you told me I was wasting my talents. And apart from being grateful, as always, for your frankness, I would hope that there have been some days when you were of a different opinion. For my part, I like to remind myself continually that you are very human resources, and it has been a great pleasure to act in this role as a member of the support staff. The support staff do an amazing job, whether conducting the business of the school, maintaining the buildings and grounds, cooking, cleaning and ironing, or helping teachers in the classroom, providing stable and reliable IT systems, running events like this one. Thank you, Rachel and Tammy. All these people play their part in creating a wonderful educational environment, and that is not even yet to mention those whose role is played in an honorary capacity, the chairman and members of the board. I admire them all for their generous contributions. One constant in my 45 years of professional life has been the teaching of German. On a recent senior school assembly, a visitor described French and Latin as irrelevant subjects. I was, of course, offended. How on earth, I wondered, in drawing up a list of irrelevant subjects, could he possibly have left German off the list? I am not offended, rather I am liberated. There is no more anti-intellectual influence in Australian education than the concept of relevance. If you pursue relevance too far, you'll end up believing that you can create an Australian national curriculum around 3 omni-relevant priorities: Indigenous history, sustainability and Asia. All very important, of course, but scarcely a total education. In a school like ours, imbued with the spirit of Canon Edwards, education needs to be judged by its enrichment of the individual and its contribution to his development, including cognitive development. Its prime function is not to serve the interests of the national economy, although genuine education will assuredly achieve that as well. I have always been encouraged at grammar that there is such strong support for language study, especially from the majority of our parents. And my real home in the school has always been the languages department. I thank my colleagues there. Even over the last 5 years, I've been allowed to remain an honorary member. Let me now finish by apologising to those who wanted me to stay longer, to those who wanted me to stay for just 2 more years, promising me a double photo portrait in the common room stairwell, and also to those, such as Sarah Payne, who wanted me to stay long enough to propose the farewell toast to her. However, the signs that it is time to go do come eventually, sometimes unexpectedly. A few years ago, comparing the staff Christmas lunch here in this hall, as I walked up and down between the tables, I was stopped by the people at the PE table. "How long have you been here, Maude?" one asked. 34 or 35 years was my answer. "Is that a record?" another asked. "Yes," I said, trying not to sound too embarrassed by the fact. "Well, we reckon Maddie Bugden can break that." said a third. At that moment, I realised I was no longer the former Director of Studies, no longer the HR manager, no longer even the MC of the Christmas lunch. I had become simply a record to be beaten. I've never been a competitive type, especially when it comes to the PE department. Well, perhaps a little competitive. Let them equal my record of 16 years as Director of Studies. The fact that so many staff are already in a position to beat my record is a great tribute to this school, of course. This is a great place to exercise the profession, the vocation of teacher. I have led a charmed life. In 38 years, there's never been a morning when I got up and didn't feel like going to work. Thank you for all of that, Canberra Grammar School, and best wishes for the future.